Hey there guys, so let's get right into this one. So on today's one, it's going to be a science tier list, so all the same stuff applies, right? It's just an opinion. It's kind of how I'm feeling about it. This was the list that I think was the hardest for me to make, and I had the most changes up until releasing it, and I'm still not like 100% sure on like two of the placements mainly. And for what science usually brings to your roster is stuff like lots of debuffs, debuffs to control the fight, and more recently in their champions is stuff like Spider-Man, even other champions, is self-buff control, the ability to like not gain any buffs or remove your own buffs, or even be like just immune to nullification. So that's been a really big part of them recently is the buff control, and a classic part of them has always been their debuffs and having lots of debuffs to do different things. I would say currently they're really good for the no buffs though right now in more recent champions, if we're being honest. So there's a couple other things that they can do, but those are like a big couple reasons why you bring them into content. So if you saw that, Torch is number one. I think right now a big, maybe for a while now actually, a big thing that science is kind of meant to do is they're kind of meant to be a niche. They're meant to like not necessarily be a champion that does the most things, but they do like one or two things super well. And Torch, ever since his release, did that. At the very start, people were like really hard on him because attack values were high, but they just weren't giving his smolders really a chance. There wasn't too much good content for him. Then they nerfed the attack values in Act 6, then they released the Abyss, and then it wasn't an issue to block a lot with Torch. And all you had to do was build your smolders up, which, as everyone knows, can just like make your damage go absolutely insane. So he has a lot of damage at that point. The heal reversal is a very aggressive heal reversal. A lot of science champions can reverse heals, but Torch is one of the best at doing it aggressively. But at this point, he's not used as a cheesing champion. He's meant to cheese all Mystic and all energy fights. There's some fights that people don't even think about him for, like stuff like Black Widow Deadly Origins. All of her hits are energy hits, so Torch is a great counter there. Stuff like that, or Korg, his SP1 is all energy hits, so you can use Torch for Korg, block the SP1. Stuff like that. His damage is just absolutely insane. He's very versatile with Nova Flames and all that. Second, I have Captain America. Both of these are champions that I've liked for a very long time. Captain America has been a personal favorite of mine for over a year now, over a year and a half. He was like my second or something, rank 5. He was one of my very first SIG 200 champions overall. I used this 5-star for like so much stuff through Act 6. His SIG ability, busted. All the buffs, all the debuffs he can apply, removing his base kit, the perfect blocks, the damage, removing unstoppable, and then all the customization from the SIG, plus his leadership synergies. He's got a lot going for him. In a class that usually specializes in a couple things, he's a champion that can really broaden his range. Same goes for the next two, but especially this next one in Void. People have always found ways to use Void in unique ways to play him kind of like Quake or something, where you just let your debuffs build and you let the damage over time tick, and you don't touch them to give them much power. You just sit there and you just dex on the wall for a while. It's not the best way to play him, but it is an option. And right, his debuffs, the damage he gets from his SIG is absolutely massive, right? He has 1800 attack, and that's almost 2400 attack rating when he has Fear of the Void. It's really insane once you get him duped. People think he needs really high SIG. The higher the SIG is obviously a lot better, but just the ability to stack Fear of the Void and get Fear of the Void on, so that way you can like reverse healing, reverse power gain, and stuff like that, is very important. He also has an evade counter, which isn't used very often, but it is there. And right, you can stack 4 of those pretty easily, so it's a minus 120% evade. Oh wait, or is it only... Yeah, it's minus 120% evade, because right, 60 and 60. So he has a fairly decent evade counter, actually. He has very steady damage, he has a lot of debuffs, he's just overall very solid. Now this is one of the first places where it's hard to kind of place them. Mr. Fantastic. So this is where it was like really hard. So it's kind of in this whole middle area is where it's like really hard. I feel like Torch and Cap, in my opinion, are just very, very good champions, very solid. Void and Mr. Fantastic are constantly compared and pit against each other, and it's kind of a personal preference thing. I think Mr. Fantastic has some advantages over Void, and Void has some advantages over him. But Mr. Fantastic has so much control over a fight, especially duped when you get the extra power gain. But when you start to build up what are they called? The careful study passives, and there was a thing that people would do for a bit where, like, for the champion boss, they would throw Mr. Fantastic in, you get the careful study passive, and then you just use any other champion and the special attacks do nothing on your block. This was before his nerf. You have all of his debuffs, which after his buff are a lot better now that he has 4 of them at the start, so he can use his pre-fights better for other champions or for himself, or he can be a pre-fight champion for one fight and actually still have enough debuffs to be able to use himself in a fight the next fight. And his debuffs are all very useful. The ability to lower combat power rate, I think, is often overlooked when people try to compare him to Void. The fact that you can stack 3 of these suppressed debuffs to get minus 75% power gain on contact is very good. A 40% petrify that stacks 3 times is very, very useful. And the siphon is very helpful, mainly for other champs. It's not as important for him, if we're being honest. Off of his SP3, he gets a very big, very, very big damage buff because you can stack a lot of debuffs with him. He's honestly one of the more aggressive debuff stacking champs in the game, and it's pretty easy to keep them on as long as you know how to heavy counter with him and just keep the heavies going. And then this was another tough spot. So, actually I don't think I have the one champion, so I don't have either of them as the star rating, so I'm just going to go here. Was Immortal Abomination and Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative's a lot newer. Immortal Abomination is still on the slightly newer side, but he's been out for a year now. So I put Mr. Negative higher because of part of what I was saying earlier, is that I feel like science champions are kind of meant to fill a niche. And his niche in war is super effective at what he does. They're removing the buffs from himself so he doesn't take as much penalties from Mystic champions. With his Sig, he regens from degeneration. He lowers the degeneration of the opponents by a lot if you have debuffs, which he can put debuffs pretty easily on the opponent. He has a super hard-hitting SP2, which will kill most of the time in a war-type situation, which is honestly one of the places I think he's used more. He is still very good for content, with having fairly good damage on that damage rotation that he has of going to the SP2 and stuff. So he's just a very solid champion at what he's meant to do. He's pretty easy to control buffs on yourself for any matchup that you don't want buffs. He gets a lot of extra damage from his Furies, but you don't really want to use those. You want to kind of get them off of you to use your Dark and Light energy. He's just an overall really good champion. Very fun to play with, very unique, especially with the sword he has. It's just really fun. The next one was Immortal Abomination. Kind of that Captain America Infinity War type thing, where he doesn't necessarily, outside of poison damage, I guess you could say, he doesn't have one thing that you would say he probably does better than anyone. If it was something, it's poison damage, which his poison damage is probably second to none, unless you're talking about Archangel neurotoxins, which aren't really poisons. His poisons themselves deal a lot of damage. His acid burn is absolutely insane when you get 1 or 2 of them on. You get to go unblockable. You can use his weaknesses, because they're actually pretty strong weaknesses, right? 30%. Some people have had it where you take 3 hits on the block and they launch special 3. So they have 3 minus 30% weaknesses on them, and you just take no damage from SP3, which is a very nice ability to be able to use if you can manage it well. He has Petrify on SP1, which also ramps him up. He has his SP2 for damage, SP3 also for damage. He just has a lot going for him. He has a couple of good synergies that add to his utility or add to other champions, like the King Groot one. Just a very, very solid champion. So now the next part is kind of those honorable mention type champions, So 2 of them are the Spider-Men. 2 are Spider-Men. So the one is a pretty recent pull for me. When I mentioned how like the science class kind of seems like they have like niches that they fit, Spider-Man 2099 is kind of a niche king. People are kind of getting a little bit too high and mighty on him because of how good his like 2 niches are, but in the matchups that he's meant for, it's absolutely ridiculous what he does. This ability up here, the minus 75% damage resistance, on a rank 3, it gives you 270,000 effective health. It might even be more than that. I don't remember the exact number, but I remember someone showing me the math, and it equates to over 270,000 effective hit points. If you don't know the way effective hit points work, it's not your actual health. It calculates in armor and resistances, so it's what it would be like when you're actually getting hit, right? He would technically still have only like the 25,000 health or whatever it is, but because of the 75% resistance, it increases it by X amount. His ruptures deal decent damage. His SP2 is his main damage, but his second niche is the power control that he has, especially with the synergy. I'm trying to remember who it's with. I think it's with Anti-Venom. It allows him to start with his Wither at the start, which a Wither is minus 120. Where is the Wither at? It's minus 125%. Yeah, there it is. 125% power gain by abilities, which is a lot. And then he has the exhaustions, which lowers it. So a lot of power control from abilities and True Strike. Outside of that, he's not a champ you want to use for too much. Now, another person who's had a niche carved out very well. I'm not too sure how good he is outside of it, but I've seen him used for this stuff, and if they are unblockable, this man is an absolute cheesing machine. It's as simple as that. They just can't touch him. Even in Abyss, you just like hit them, they can't hit you. You just never stop throwing combos. His damage with his SIG can actually scale very high because you can complete your challenges multiple times. He's a really cool champion. He's actually someone I would like to pull because he's pretty cool, right? Ruptures, weaknesses, shocks, power stings, missing. He misses a lot. There's a lot going on here. I think it would be wrong if I didn't mention a champion that I have as a rank 3 who was also my first SIG 200 and thing. Just a utility beast. His damage is just a little bit low. I think the Human Torch synergy is really underrated. It allows him to build his Furies quicker. But yeah, Thing is a very, very high utility champion. Nullify, Bleed, Shock, Armor Break, Nullify, Stagger, Fate, Seal. He just has a lot going on for him. So that'll just about be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. The science list is really hard. Science is such a strong class, but they're also unique kind of within that class itself. So it's easy to compare them. Not easy, it's hard to compare them, but it's easy to like fight over it. So I hope you guys have a good one. I'll be seeing you guys soon. Hope to get out more videos very, very soon.